Welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host Gwyn. With me, as always, is Jared. And for those of you who tuned in last week, our countdown didn't work, so we just popped up, and and so I was interested to see if it was going to work this time. Must have been a fluke.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, we're so used to it that it just felt really weird to just start.
The only thing I could think of that was comparable was when the countdown music changed on us, and we weren't expecting that. I think that was for Nosferatu stream, and all of a sudden it was this very flowy, nice music, and we were like, "What the hell?"
and then of course, to cap it off at the end of last week, instead of ending the stream, I hit exit the stream, which took me off of it but kept the stream going. So I had to wait until I could get back in and then hit end stream. So it was all very awkward last week, but but that's okay. I feel like the apps, the everything in between went great. It was just the open and close.
We're a two-man band here. We don't have an army of engineers running behind the scenes trying to figure out what's going on. So if we hit a button and something gets messed up, it's okay to point the finger at us.
Yeah. Which is why when I logged back in after messing up at the end, you started talking to me, and I wasn't sure if you realized that the stream was still going or not. And so I was like, please be quiet, Jerry, before you say something you're going to regret.
I regret nothing.
Yeah. But yeah, so welcome everyone. We are back, and this week we're doing a stream that we meant to do back last month, or the tail end of June, somewhere around there, where it was going to line up with a special occasion for talking about the movie, but I was feeling under the weather and things just didn't work out, but we're talking about it now, and that is the 2000 historical epic, The Patriot, which I had an absolute blast watching today. I think it's been a little while since I watched it. I did recently listen to the soundtrack because they released a beautiful newfangled 3-disc expanded soundtrack album, and we will talk about the music. But I hadn't watched the movie in a little while, and not that I haven't watched it since it came out. I've watched it many, many times, but I was struck by the different level on which I processed things versus when I was 14 years old in 2000, and the sort of depth of the story and dealing with issues of generational trauma and issues of revenge and and how wars are fought and things where it's not that I wasn't considering them at the time, but I think I just didn't have the life experience that I do now. Yeah. And so things just struck me differently. Plus I was closer in age when I saw this to the main character's younger children, versus now I guess I'm closer in age to the main character, which is creates for a very different experience watching a movie like this. So yeah, it was very interesting revisiting it today, and it was a great rewarding experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is I hope going to be a really fun discussion, because this is a movie that I kind of think of it as having discovered it around the same time that are a couple of movies that are in a similar vein, which were this movie came out in 2000. We're celebrating its 25th anniversary, and I saw it. One of the things that brought me to this movie was that very shortly before I'd seen it for the first time, I saw two other movies that I love dearly, and we have talked about on this channel, one of which also celebrated its 25th anniversary. this year, which was Gladiator, and then on the other Mel Gibson starring epic Braveheart. This movie kind of formed not like almost an unofficial trilogy with those movies in my mind, because I think, as I mentioned when we talked about Gladiator and Braveheart, these were some of the first, adult movies in the sense of R-rated, movies that I ever had the opportunity to see, and I watched a lot of them. I think I've, joked. I watched a lot of them up above the garage in my dad's old weightlifting setup on a very small TV, because those were they were not the kind of movies that my mom was gonna, want to put on. Although my
that
mom
really paints the picture.
Yeah, although my mom really loves this movie. But it's the fact is that it was like, it wasn't like where you would expect to encounter an epic movie like this, but it was a case of the story being so powerful that it drew me in anyway. And since then, I have seen the movie in much better format. I just watched it in 4K HD on my new big 85-inch TV.
Nice.
And so, because when we were going to do this movie originally a couple weeks ago, I realized I didn't actually have the Patriot on physical media, so I bought the 4K of it. And
how are you liking the 4K experience?
Oh, it's delightful. It feels like having a movie theater in my house, which, considering I don't get to the movie theater quite as much as I would like these days, it's great just to have that set up. And the movie, it looks amazing and remastered in 4K. So it was a fun experience to be able to see it again, almost as if for the first time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm really glad that the timing worked out for you to watch it in 4K for this viewing, because the Blu-ray was one of the earliest Blu-rays released on the format, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the only version that was on that Blu-ray was actually the extended cut, which was not a true extended cut. It's like Sony went through this phase where they went through their entire library in around like 2006 and said, hey, we can reissue all these and stick the deleted scenes in them and market them as special editions. And so I'm really glad that you had the chance to watch the original theatrical cut in like remastered 4K, and it's an absolutely beautiful presentation. And yeah, it really brought me back, and it reminded me of the fact that it's interesting that you mentioned Gladiator, because that too came out in the year 2000, and along with another film that we discussed just not too long ago, which was X-Men. And I have a distinct memory. It's been 25 years. I think the statute of limitations has probably passed. I have a distinct memory of downloading all three of those movies via, not entirely legal means, the bootleg versions while they were still out in theaters. The early days of being on the internet. And so that memory kind of ties all three of those movies together for me. But yeah, it's just, oh God, what a wonderful movie. And also, yeah, there is sort of this feeling of a triumvirate between Braveheart, The Patriot, and Gladiator being like the big movie epics of their day. And yeah, how spoiled I feel in 2000 we got two of them in the same year, so much so that I've said this before, but I was actually worried that this movie might encroach a bit on Gladiator's success when the Oscars rolled around little did I know that the Oscars weren't really. Yeah, apparently they weren't into this one too much. I guess only one big epic movie, per awards season. But
three nominations, but yeah, they were all 10.
Yeah, but yeah, now that it's 25 years later, any sense of competition there is gone from my mind. So I can just enjoy both movies as glorious epics. But yeah, no, I remember seeing this in theaters because I don't think I'm remembering specifically the first time I went. I remember the second time I went because I took my friend Tim with me, and just showing you how long ago this was and what my interest was at the time. I was not that they've changed all that much, but I just remember he and I went to go see it in the theater, but in another theater in front of some terrible Dimension Films movie. They were showing the trailer for the fourth Highlander movie, which I was super excited about, and so I went to go sneak a glimpse at that, and then come back into the theater, and he was into that as much as I was at the time. So when I came back in, having only missed like the first 5 minutes of the movie, he was like, "Dang it, I should have gone with you. You didn't miss anything." And so yeah, so I have that memory of it, and yeah, it's. But yeah, this is just. Yeah, watching it again today reaffirmed it as like one of my favorite movies of the early 2000s.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think it's a movie that even if it didn't have quite the same Oscar success as something like Gladiator or Braveheart, it is every bit as ambitious as those movies are, and it also feels like kind of a not quite singular, but more unique than I would think people would give it credit for, because I was actually having this conversation with my friend and your friend Eric Monroe on Bluesky, who was excited to hear that we were talking about this movie. And we started talking about just how few movies there actually are about the American Revolutionary War. And you would think it would be an incredibly rich subject, and there have been some interesting ones, but when I think Revolutionary War epic, it's telling that like the movie that almost invariably springs to mind is The Patriot, because very few of other movies like that actually operate on the same scale. Weirdly, if I was going to pick another Revolutionary War movie that I think is a masterpiece or a great movie, I would probably go to the filmed production of the play Hamlet before I jump to some of the others. But the thing about it is that it is a movie obviously based in not just real world history, but our history as Americans. And that is something that has opened it up, I think, to a great deal of criticism, because the movie is not telling an exact one-to-one true history. A lot of these characters are composite characters, but it is telling the story of that time period and the people, what the colonists, the American colonists at that time, were going through in trying to create a new nation. And I think that is something that, as we've been going through our own unique kind of political challenges at this time, that is something that people probably have more complicated feelings about. But I still think it's one of the reasons I was still so keen to talk about this movie is because, this is one of the things that America has always, struggled with, is the idea of the fact of being a nation built on ideals, and that coming into conflict with kind of some of the more, the darker aspects of human nature. And this movie has a lot of darkness in it, and it deals with a lot of, issues of trauma and violence, and what it takes to, create something new. And there are other aspects of our history that obviously the movie doesn't reckon with as much, and we can talk about those. But I think ultimately where I come down on why the movie is still something so, is worth reviewing and why it's worth thinking about this period of our history is because, when we think about the idea of striving for a more perfect union and the idea that we are imperfect and never have been perfect, I think about the fact that it's all we can ask for is a chance to try and build something new. And it's why one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the scene that I used to promote this stream over on Bluesky, which is when Gabriel is talking to the freed slave Occam, and he says, "They call this the new world. It's not. It's the same as the old. But we'll have a chance to build a new world, a world where all men are created equal under God." And that is really kind of the movie's, ethos. And our ethos as Americans is the idea that that is our ideal. And it is an ideal that we have never fully reached, obviously, with the cardinal, sin of America being the fact of, even when we were fighting to create this idealized, nation based on freedom, there was a large percentage of the population that was not free in the form of the, African American slaves. And women weren't considered equal either. But over the course of our history, we have been striving always to live up to that ideal. And we've made a lot of progress. And then recently, there's been a little bit of backsliding, maybe a lot of that. It is an ideal that is not dead, and it is an ideal that I think is still worth fighting for. And the idea that we should ever surrender this idea of patriotism or allow it to be conflated with nationalism, which is something that you talked about, that is an idea that I do not accept. And while this movie is I think an imperfect vessel for those ideas in certain respects, it is a movie that I do believe kind of shows us what it takes sometimes to fight for those ideals and the journey that you have to go on through your own heart of darkness in a way, and the sacrifices that have to be made. And that's why 25 years later, I still think it is a movie that is worth talking about and worth celebrating, even if there are aspects that are perhaps, some people might take issue with.
Yeah. It's interesting. Another example, what I was talking about earlier about how, like, my life experience causes me to, do certain things differently. It's, when Gabriel and Occam are having that conversation, and Occam's response is, sounds good. Which is, I have a different understanding of, like, the layers of that response, now versus, when I was younger, just take that comment at face value. But now the notion that, there's a part of that that says, sounds good. But obviously his life experiences, it led him to be very suspicious of such talk. And, and rightfully so, as history has borne out. But I think it is like, but Gabriel in that scene is genuine. He's not attempting to pull one over on this guy, and so, and for that reason, I think even though Benjamin is our main protagonist in the film, I've always viewed Gabriel as the hero of the story, just because I think it's his idealism and his commitment to the cause that propels everything forward and propels Benjamin forward, even as he's reeling from all the loss and pain that he undergoes. And so, and it's a testament to the skills of the great Heath Ledger, who we lost far too soon. I everybody always rightfully points to The Dark Knight when they talk about him. For me, I've always been very partial to his turns in both this and A Knight's Tale, just because I think that this shows the sort of the real human side to to his personality, to his acting, and that said, he obviously won the Oscar for the correct role, even posthumously as it was. But I always want to remember his other great work, because he was just so astounding, and I'm really glad he was in this film, because he brings so much to it.
Yeah, and I mean, anytime I watch any Heath Ledger movie, it's always a bittersweet experience, because I have rarely seen an actor where the talent was just so manifestly obvious on screen that I was like that. It sounds trite to say that like we were robbed, because obviously of so many more of his great performances, because the man lost his life. It's a terrible thing that happened. But it's it is a truth that like he was 28 years old when he died, and there were so many great performances that he could still have given, and there were so many that he did give in his relatively short life. And this is one of them that I think really kind of helped stake his claim as a young, actor, who just had the entire world in front of him. Before this, the thing that I had seen him in and that he had kind of had been his big break was the movie 10 Things I Hate About You, which I love that movie, and I think he's great in it. But there's, I've been reading about the fact that like, he basically was getting at that time, Hollywood was just offering him a bunch of like teen heartthrob type roles in a similar vein to that one, and he didn't want to do those roles. He wanted to stretch his chops as an actor earlier, and then he got the chance to do this movie, which is not bad. It is a movie that shows that he, where, as you said, he is in many respects.
Some of that was still put to good use. His innate charm as a heartthrob.
Well, I mean, you can't take the charm away from Heath Ledger, and case in point of that is like the following year he makes A Knight's Tale, which is rarely has an actor ever been more charming in anything than Heath Ledger is in that movie. But what I mean by that is that he is playing a character who is, he is young, he's 17, 18 years old in this movie. But he's incredibly principled, and he's incredibly, strong-willed. And he is the character who, as you said, kind of drives his father and inspires his father to step out away from the darkness that had kind of been threatening to consume him, and make a better choice. And a lot of that is born in tragedy, and Gabriel himself does not live to see the nation that he so strongly believed in come into being. But it is telling that the movie ends with his words, and like to jump right to the end, but Occam, the character that Gabriel was having that conversation with, evokes Gabriel's name in the final scene as basically the idea, this is what we fought for. This is what Gabriel believed in. And Heath Ledger makes you feel that not only in, when he's, fighting for his freedom, but, and also in the scenes where we see him, truly living, when he's falling in love with Anne Howard, and some of incredibly charming and sweet scenes there. And I just, I just, again, this is like, it takes range to pull off a character like this and pull it off convincingly. And it's why this, while The Dark Knight is kind of in a class by itself, and obviously had other great performances like Brokeback Mountain, and I would put The Knight's Tale up there as redefining Heath Ledger performances for me.
Yeah, and like always, I skip over like one of the most important roles of the person's career that I'm talking about, Brokeback Mountain, of course, which I am very much still of the opinion that, yeah, I said he won the Oscar for the right role. I'm gonna add an asterisk to that. If he couldn't win for Brokeback Mountain, because arguably, like he should have won for that as well.
I think he probably could have, although he was up against Philip Seymour Hoffman, who was also great in his role, and was like one of those older, more veteran actors who we have also tragically lost. So it's hard to get upset about that because we know he would win for The Dark Knight 3 years later, but I think his role in Brokeback probably, it was too soon, unfortunately, for the Academy for that role, for that character, unfortunately, and for that film.
Yeah,
but yeah, on merit, he should be a two-time Oscar winner, and if he had lived, I think he probably.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, and we're obviously going to come back around to him. I guess there's no way to start talking about this without the elephant in the room. Obviously, any discussion of Mel Gibson is a complicated one. We broached this when we talked about Braveheart, and we're going to tend to focus on the film and the performance, and obviously. Mel has continued to be the nice way to put it would be polarizing figure, and his actions have not made that any less difficult of an obstacle to surmount. But as I said, I'm going to focus on the film and the performance. These movies, talking Braveheart and The Patriot, as well as a lot of his other work. I'm thinking like, Lethal Weapon and the Mad Max films. One thing that I will not take from him is he was always a very charismatic actor, and that's on full display in this movie. I love the character of Benjamin Martin. I think he is such a great protagonist in the film, and a character who is like equal parts like charm and heroic, but also deeply flawed, and with a very dark past and something for which he feels immense guilt and regret over. I just think he has so many facets that just make him really interesting. And there's an inherent tragedy to the character in the sense that he lives through the death of so many loved ones. We open the movie to learn that he's lost his wife, and over the course of the movie, he will also lose two of his sons. And then the movie even gets to a point where we think he is going to, give the ultimate sacrifice and die in a way not too dissimilar from how he went in Braveheart. And that's when the movie actually gets subversive in a really, really ingenious way to especially for those of us who were very young seeing this movie, and our exposure to big epic movies was limited, and we were like, well, Mel Gibson died in the other big epic movie he did, so it makes sense he's going to die here too. And then the fact that he doesn't, but he lives through that, and I think that just adds to more of the tragedy of his character in a way of a father who surpasses the sort of life expectancy of his children, of some of his children, and has to go on living, even though the movie ends on a hopeful and uplifting note, I think he's still going to live with that moving forward in his life, and so it just makes for really interesting fodder for a character, and Mel Gibson has had many great performances over his career. I think this is one of my favorite of his, and that's a tall order, like narrowing them down. But yeah, absolutely beautiful work and a beautiful character, and for as much as Mel Gibson the person is like I feel very conflicted in terms of how I feel about him, but in terms of creating this on-screen character, I think that his performance as Benjamin Martin sort of stands as like a true, like, beautiful example of patriotism and heroism, while reckoning with the mistakes of the past. And so I know some people may not be able to like separate those two out, but I'm content to do so because I have so much love for this character and for this film.
Yeah, no, I think I have said multiple times before, as you have, that our personal philosophy is to separate the art from the artist and try to focus on the work as much as possible, because I will acknowledge I do not share Mel Gibson's political views. I think he's done a number of things in his life that I find kind of morally questionable at best, if not outright repugnant. But I also do acknowledge that he has been a major character and lead actor in several movies that I absolutely love, like Braveheart and like this movie. And I think his performance in these movies is great, legitimately great. And
it's a key part of why these movies are as great as they are. So you can't like, I'm not going to, take that middle road of, well, we'll just minimize his like participation. No, that can't be done. His screen presence, his performance, and his charisma are a major part of why these movies work as amazing.
Yeah, and again, it varies from person to person. Like, I know somebody, I love and respect very much, my youngest sister, Logan. She has never liked Mel Gibson. It was pulling teeth to get her to watch Braveheart. I don't know if she's ever seen this movie, and that's totally fair. But for me, I just loving these movies, particularly Braveheart and the Patriot, as I do, and like the Mad Max films. It's like I have made the decision that's like I am not going to allow my disagreements with some of Mel Gibson's views to steal my appreciation away from this piece of art that he made in collaboration with a lot of other great artists. Yeah. These movies still mean something to me. And I acknowledge his contributions to them. And again, everyone has to make their judgment for themselves. Like, there are other actors that I have a harder time doing that with, I will acknowledge. But in this case, when I watch Mel Gibson's performance as Benjamin Martin, I see the character of Benjamin Martin. And I am invested in his journey, and I am invested in his, all that he goes through, his dark, haunted past, and his, the trauma and the loss that he suffers, and ultimately the fight that he commits to, and the victory that he wins. And I will acknowledge that in scenes like this one, where he is carrying the American flag up the hill and leading his countrymen up to against and a charge against the British Army and turning the tide of battle, it causes my heart to start to beat faster and to feel the thrill of what cinema can do. And he is part of that. So, again, it will come down to what everyone, have to make that determination for themselves. I just want to be honest about where I am with it, because I love this movie. I love this performance. I love this character. And, the man himself is flawed, as many respects, as the movie can be as well, but it still was capable of moving me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think of there's like so many moments, and we can embellish on them as we go through certain parts of the film, but moments that just come to mind are that slow look up that he gives to Tavington after he's killed what's the younger son's name, Thomas, and then when Gabriel is leaving for a second time, and he says, "I forbid you to go. I'm not a child. You're my child." That it's just so full of like just raw emotion, and then the scene where he loses Gabriel, and just he's just reduced to this outpouring of of grief. That was the scene. I remember when I saw that, I was like, "Oh fuck, he's gonna steal the Oscar from Russell Crowe." I needn't have feared that, but it honestly, he should have been a major contender. Based off of his performance, I'm ultimately very happy that Russell Crowe was able to take the award that year, because that was my favorite performance of the year. But just like so many moments of and then he's got like beautifully like humorous moments. Like we start off the movie with him making the rocking chairs and him hurling another one in frustration into the pile. And then his daughter just going, he's like, "Sorry." And then when Gabriel comes riding up next to him with the ink in his teeth, just that sort of look over at him like, "I'm not gonna ask." And there's just so many great moments, and of course, and then when he another look, similar to that, when he comes, finishes making the bullets for the battle, and he sees Villeneuve come out of the tent in his full French regalia, and and he's just looking at him, not saying anything, and then Villeneuve says, "If I will die well dressed."
God,
yeah. So there's just like great humor, coming from, while this character also has immense gravitas, and we can hold off on talking about it for now, but obviously the scene between him and Gabriel telling him about Fort Wilderness is just like one of the powerhouse moments of the film, and shows the true horror of war and what men are capable of, and what they are capable of moving beyond acknowledging, where they've gone wrong. Obviously, it doesn't forgive what's been done, but it's I almost look at it as a sort of parallel to this country of ours, where there's plenty of atrocities that we have committed throughout history, and yet there are those of us who still strive towards that dream of a more perfect union, and it's a messy road, but I like the idea that that there's not necessarily forgiveness ahead, but there is a better path ahead.
Yeah, No, I mean, and the character of Benjamin Martin, he has lived a very, rich but also complicated life before this movie even begins. And that only becomes more so as the story of the movie unfolds. But it's evident in his network of relationships that we see throughout the movie, both established and the new ones that form. And it's one of the reasons why Mel Gibson gets to give such a wide-ranging performance, that is so compelling, because we see him interact with all of his older sons, Gabriel and Thomas, also his younger children. His dynamic with his youngest daughter Susan in particular forms an emotional cornerstone for the movie. His romantic dynamic with Charlotte, his wife's sister, who the two of them clearly have very deep feelings for each other. His kind of friendship, like respect, like honest and respectful friendship with the character of Harry Burwell, played by Chris Cooper. Excellent supporting performance. The kind of the more colloquial relationship he has with Naked Nation.
Can I just say, he doesn't necessarily get a whole lot, but every time he's on screen, he's utterly fantastic. I do love the character of John Billings and his little.
No, I was so happy to see, because I saw Deadwood after I saw this movie. Obviously, when he popped up, I mean, most people know him from Deadwood. I'm like, it's John Billings from the Patriot. And then you mentioned his dynamic with Villeneuve, which is a consistent source of of interesting pathos, but also humor, because these characters were former enemies and now they find themselves on the same side. And Benjamin Martin's attitudes about the French, they do get to play with the comedy. Like one of the little moments I love is when they're undercover and they're rowing the boat to Cornwallis's ship, and Benjamin is sitting at the prow and he's looking at Villeneuve in the red coat, and you can tell that Villeneuve is just absolutely seething because he hates the English and he hates that he's doing this, and he's just like, "You look good in that color." And then Villeneuve shoots daggers. I'm like, "It stinks," and he's like, he shrugs like, "Well, it's had a dead man in it." And again, that's charming and fun. And then on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, there is the absolute darkness and blackened rage that comes into play whenever he gets to face off against Tavington. And oh my God, we're going to talk about Jason Isaacs.
Jason Isaacs, what? Before he was Lucius Malfoy, and everybody knew him for that iconic performance. I remember when he was cast in that, everybody was like, "It's the bad guy from The Patriot," and I'm like, "It's Jason Isaacs," because speaking of, I mentioned Highlander earlier. He had a guest starring role in one episode of that show, and because I was so obsessed with that show, anytime somebody who had been in that show popped up in something else, I was like, I know that guy. I was the DiCaprio pointing meme. And I remember the first time I noticed him in something was he had a very bit part in the movie Armageddon as one of the NASA guys. And then he showed up in this, and I was like, ooh, he's going to be good in this. And he didn't quite steal the movie necessarily because it has so many great performances, but this is one of the most memorable villains in cinema history. I mean, he is awful. He is the worst. And so, yeah, I feel like this is the thing that propelled him big time. And then he got Potter later on, but yeah, it's just, I know you said we'll talk about him later, but as soon as you mentioned it, I don't know, talking about it, just sometimes I'm all praise for subtlety, and sometimes I'm like, no, we don't need subtlety. We need a really nasty villain and that's what I love about his turn in this movie. It's like, it's not enough for him to burn, order the Martins, farm to be burned. Not enough for him to say he's going to hang Gabriel. Not enough to take the freed workers who work on the farm and basically enslave them again. Not enough even to kill Thomas. Then he has to look Benjamin straight in the eyes and say, "Stupid boy." Like, you cannot make someone any worse, and because it's performed so brilliantly by Jason Isaacs, it's just like, you never forget this character. And they always say, like, the key to a great movie is, like, as much as a great hero, you need a really great villain. And I think that's a big part of why this movie has such staying power, is that it has a villain you truly despise with every fiber of your being.
No, I vividly remember that, I was maybe 11 or 12 the first time I saw this movie, and I'd seen like bad guys before and like Disney stuff and the Star Wars movies and other things, but like Jason Isaacs as Colonel Willington Tavington was one of the first movie villains that I truly remember hating, in the best way, in the way you're supposed to when you're watching cinema, but just like, oh, you are so evil and so callous and cruel and so just rotten to the core that you almost can't even recognize him as human, but you have to recognize him as like among the worst of humanity. And you mentioned that, like, subtlety isn't really the name of the game of the performance. I would agree. It's very upfront with his darkness and villainy. But one of the things that makes him so effective is that it's the softness of his performance in certain points.
Yeah.
Just the fact that, like, he rarely raises his voice, but it's just, he's so menacing in the syllable.
There's different kinds of subtlety. And what I very much meant by that is that, like, he's not subtle in his intentions. He's not subtle in how evil he is. But the actual performance, but the sort of measure of the performance and how he speaks, like, there is subtlety to that. And, and I love the sort of back and forth between him and Cornwallis, who we haven't talked about yet, played by the great Tom Wilkinson, rest in peace. But I love, he comes in and he says, he's overhearing the conversation between Cornwallis and his, second in command or whatever, and he's like, His Majesty is very generous. Though your service in this war more than warrants such a gift. Yes, this is how His Majesty rewards those, who fight for the crown, with honor. And says, maybe I should hope that my own meager contributions may be rewarded one day. You may presume too much.
Yeah.
It's so great. And Tom Wilkinson, by the way, like the other big villain in this movie, who like takes on the air of being very civilized and, and honorable, but when push comes to shove, he is willing to unleash Tavington when he needs to.
Yeah, no, I mean, Cornwallis is, it's a great Tom Wilkinson performance as well. This is one of the first things I remember seeing him in. And yes, Cornwallis is one of the characters in this movie who is a direct, real world, person who is being portrayed here. And Tom Wilkinson just really captures the hyper competence that makes him such a feared, military general, but also, as Benjamin points out, the pride that ultimately, in many respects, becomes his downfall. And I think that he's a necessary check on the character of Tavington, both because, Tavington is in many respects a true monster who knows he's a monster, who is choosing to be a monster because he believes that is the only way he can get ahead in this world. Like there's the one of the few humanizing moments where we see of Tavington is when he is being chastised by Cornwallis, and Cornwallis is condemning him for not fighting war like a gentleman, and we see Tavington almost respectfully, but quite scathingly saying, "My late father squandered any respect that our family may have had, along with my inheritance. I advance myself only through victory." And Cornwallis' response, "You advance yourself only through my good graces."
And that just flattens the expression on Tavington. Yeah. It's one of my favorite bits of performance from Tom Wilkinson. Just the flatness of, "You advance yourself only through my good graces."
Yeah. It's enough to put a check on Tavington right up until the moment when, as you pointed out, Cornwallis is starting to feel the pressure that Benjamin and his militia are putting on their campaign, and then he kind of makes a deal with the devil, literally, to unleash Tavington. But even then, you can tell that once Tavington has been unleashed, he can't be put back in the bottle. And it's why one of my absolute favorite moments, and one I think of constantly whenever Tavington is doing something dastardly, is the moment when at the Battle of the Cowpens and Tavington sees Benjamin on the field and decides to charge without an order, and we see Cornwallis looking at him, and he's just like, "Tavington, damn him, damn that man." And I find myself thinking of that every time Tavington does something terrible. It's going, "Tavington, damn him, damn that man."
Oh god, there's so much wonderful, also so much wonderful Britishness on display in this movie, mostly courtesy of Tom Wilkinson, but also I mentioned it before. I've now looked into. Oh wait, no, that's a different one.
It's a Peter Woodward who plays his General O'Hara, his second in command.
I'm looking to confirm that now. Yes, there we go. Yeah. It's that when Cornwallis goes, "These rustics are so inept, nearly takes the honor out of victory." Nearly. And that chuckle that O'Hara gives, it's like he's being so very British in that moment. And they're so awful, and speaking of which, I will take a moment to say, I remember around the time this movie came out and people were like, "Why are the British always the villains?" It's like, it's about the freaking American Revolution. What do you expect? Being told by Americans. Of course the British are the villains. And just and I'm not gonna excuse ourselves from this. I would expect at some point, maybe when cinema is not so as American centric as it has been for so long, I imagine that point will come. At some point we'll be exposed to many a film where Americans are painted as outright villains, which would be more than appropriate. But I say that because the British likewise have been very villainous throughout history. It's just like us. There's a whole history of colonialism, and it's so sorry, but they certainly earned it in this particular conflict. But yeah, it's but I think what the movie does is we also do see instances of British soldiers and officers who are not necessarily, sort of two-dimensional villains. That I'm thinking specifically of, there's the officer who thanks Benjamin for the care of His Majesty's soldiers early in the movie, but then unfortunately Tavington comes on screen, and it's a whole conversation about the notion that just following orders, but in that particular circumstance, that officer does not necessarily have a whole lot of choice in what he does. And speaking of which, we will really talking about the cost of quote unquote just following orders. We will very much talk about the character of James Wilkins, played by Adam Baldwin, because is that that's a character who, if he survived, is going to be living with a lot of guilt moving forward. But we'll get to that. So yeah, I just like the cast on this. The thing is amazing. We've talked about some of the heavy hitters. I do just want to mention some of the militia that we haven't highlighted yet. Dan Scott, played by Donal Logue, who many people will know from the TV series Gotham, and he's been in a number of other things. I watched this. I was like, oh, he's a little baby.
Yeah. Him from the beloved but very short-lived and little-watched show Terriers. But he has also been in, he's been a working actor for a long time. And yeah, like, this is one of those cases where, like, the first time I saw him, I didn't know who he was. And then I saw him in other things. And then I went back to this movie and I'm like, oh shit, it's young Donal Logue. And he's playing a not very nice guy at the beginning of this movie who learns to be a slightly better guy by the end.
Yeah. He definitely has some moments where you're like, fuck that guy. But yeah, he at least seems to go on a journey throughout the film and gets to a better place by the end of it. So it's may we hope as much for our country.
Yeah.
One of the other big names I want to mention, which I can never pronounce his name. I love the actor so much, but let me give it a shot. René Auberjonois, something close to that, plays Reverend Oliver, who many people will know this brilliant actor from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, as Odo. I had not seen Deep Space Nine by this point, so I didn't necessarily make that connection, even though I know a lot of people did, obviously, because that's a very famous character. But I loved him in this as as the Reverend who takes up arms. It's a very funny moment where they're like, Reverend? and it's great because he is at various moments he serves as like part of the conscience of the group along with Gabriel. But then by the end of his arc, he proves himself to be like a really badass soldier as well, and has like one of the big heroic moments as he's killed, and then lifts up the gun for Gabriel to catch in like just a moment of true badassery. And so, yeah, I loved, I think this was, in fact, the movie where I really noticed him. And then when I would see him in other things, I'd be like, oh, it's the preacher from the Patriot, which is so funny because he was known so much for other things. But yeah, I really liked his performance a lot.
Yeah, I do too. He is, he is a man of God, who, as he says, a shepherd must tend his flock and occasionally fight off the wolves, which is a great line. And it is, as you said, gives us a light on one of the more, sympathetic, and members of Benjamin's militia group, because, it is kind of a ragtag bunch, and they make it clear, they do not hide the fact that a lot of the people who they recruit in this, to this militia are not the best guys in the world. Some of them are people who are purely in this for the money or the sport, or just for the chance for revenge against the redcoats. And a lot of and some of them, like it's starting off, Dan Scott is very much a open and rather toxic racist to Occam before Occam saves his life, and he starts to go on a slight journey of penance and redemption. But the character of Reverend Oliver is kind of a moral compass for the group. And there's that scene when they are the militia are executing surrendering British troops, and he is one of the characters who, along with Gabriel, who objects to this, and basically, like, if we're actually fighting for these ideals that we say we're fighting for, we need to be better than this. And and Benjamin listens to them.
It actually, that leads us into something I want to discuss next, which is, these men were about to surrender, which they were already saying, we surrender. And then Villeneuve says, maybe, but we'll never know. And you can see the more disreputable members of the group being like, you don't know anything about war, and Gabriel says, I know the difference between fighting for a cause, and then he's cut off. And it just, and the fact that, like, the buck stops with Benjamin, he's the leader of the militia, and he hears what his son is saying, and more than in part driven by his regrets over the past, agrees with him, and even to the objections of Villeneuve in particular. And that's when that conflict comes into sharp focus, that no such quarter was given to my, wife and daughters when they were killed. And also, who are you to give such an order? I know what your men did to my countrymen at Fort Wilderness. And and just driving home that, like, war can get really nasty, and something that's even brought up by Cornwallis, about the manner in which we fight the war. His Majesty, like history, judges us by the manner in which the war was fought. And it gets into the messy territory of, like, are we going to stand by our ideals, or are we going to descend into this sort of this rabid army that just wants revenge for this or that? And it's striking that one of the earliest things that we see when Benjamin is called to the what is it, where they refer to, it's not the Continental Congress, but it's
the Assembly. It's the local South Carolina,
the Assembly. And we see, like, outside the Assembly of, cries of "Hang King George," and all these effigies, like being burned and hung. And so there is this part of, the fight for freedom and war that is this sort of bloodthirsty nature on the part of those who inevitably are going to be, some of those will be fighting in that conflict. But it's a question of, do you give into that sort of, you know, I'll just say it, barbaric, lust for vengeance and your own sense of what gets called in the Hateful Eight frontier justice, or whether you're going to conduct yourselves better than that. And yeah, this movie has a lot to say maybe about our current world and the fervor in which we conduct ourselves. But yeah, it's I think the movie is like, I don't think it offers easy answers either, because even when Benjamin relays the story about Fort Wilderness, as much as it's him coming clean about the atrocities he committed, he was spurned on to do those things because atrocities were committed, against their side, against women and children. And so the lines get blurred very easily. And I think it takes someone of like, strong moral fiber to, in the face of that, say, no, we still need to, not give in to that dark side of our nature. And even Gabriel, as sort of the true north as he is, in the face of, when his loved one is taken from him, goes right off in search of revenge, and perhaps inspired by what he's seen his father do, instead of killing Tavington with a few clear shots from his gun, goes to make it personal, which then results in his own death. So I think that the movie raises these questions, but I think the characters are, their relationship with sort of how to conduct themselves, it is quite messy in the film, I think intentionally so. And but yeah, but I think ultimately it's all capped off beautifully, I think, by Benjamin's line when Tavington says, "It would seem you are not the better man," and Benjamin says, "You're right, my sons were better men." And so yeah,
and it's the hope that like every generation that follows would be a little bit better than the one before. That's obviously not always the case, but it's, if you don't believe in that possibility, then there's no room for hope in that things will ever get better. And this, you mentioned that this movie doesn't offer up easy answers to those questions. That's because there are no easy answers, and like there's the very concept that almost seems like oxymoronic in a way of the idea of civilized warfare. And it's like, what the hell does that even mean when the goal of warfare is to kill people on the other side until eventually they give up? But there is such a thing as maybe not truly like, purely civilized warfare in that way, but there are degrees, absolutely. And this movie shows that on multiple levels. On the one hand, just the fact of certain ideas of rules of engagement, that, one of the few things that almost everyone agrees with when it comes to war is that you should try to kill as few non-combatants, civilians, as possible. And the characters who ignore or flagrantly violate that rule, like Tavington throughout the movie, are treated rightly as evil. And then, surrendering, troops, should be given quarter. And, there's a practical, cost that comes with that. You have to feed them, you have to house them, you have to send people to watch them. But what's the alternative? The alternative is you shoot them dead. Like, that's clearly not moral. The idea that you shouldn't torture, clearly torture is considered an evil act. And as you pointed out, like Benjamin Martin saw that, back in the French and Indian War, that the French and their their Cherokee allies committed atrocities and tortured, men, women, and children, raped them, it's implied in many respects as well. And so they tortured and mutilated and killed them in turn. And that is clearly presented as an act of which he has deep regret. And at a certain point, if you get involved in that cycle of vengeance, it will continue in that forever until someone makes the choice to break it. And this movie ultimately does depict the breaking of that cycle in many respects. Perhaps not forever, but for the character of Benjamin Martin, our protagonist, he ultimately chooses to fight the war in a better way, inspired by the example of his sons, who were, as you said, the better men. And there are other examples of it too. Like, one of the things if we take take a wider view, one of the other things that civilized warfare almost seems, quaint, is the idea that this movie depicts what at the time was considered to be civilized warfare, which is two armies march straight at each other in an open field with these musket guns and bayonets, and they stop, a couple, dozen yards away from each other, and then they take turns firing at each other. And you're like, this is how you're going to fight the war? And then this movie goes on to show as a tactic that in many respects is considered to be what's considered at the time to be dishonorable, but is far more effective, which is the idea that we now consider modern warfare, guerrilla warfare, and so this is, and Cornwallis's objections to things like, Benjamin Martin's through targeting his supply lines and his personal effects and officers and saying this is not the conduct of a gentleman, and Benjamin's kind of scathing response, if the conduct of your officers is the conduct of a gentleman, I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, which is so great. That was actually, it's one of the great trailer moments too. It was in there. It's where it was shortened down to just like, this is not the conduct of a gentleman. I'll take that as a compliment. And like so many especially from a modern perspective, it's like, I'm really very much struck by this whenever I'm watching like historical films or television shows now, not just in sort of issues of combat, but like how people speak to each other. And, in the case of this movie, the idea that, Benjamin, the leader of the militia, the source of all their problems, comes to the base holding a white flag. And because has a white flag and has shown no aggression right there, they're just going to let him go. And, it's helped on by the fact that they believe, he's holding some of their officers, but the sort of gentlemanly, sort of manner of all that, just like, it's good because like, again, it's actually good to have sort of rules in warfare, but also you're kind of like, in that moment, it's actually one of the few moments where I understand Tavington. Like when he's like, this is madness. It's like, really? You're just letting him go? Yeah. It's that sort of, there's a funny thing about like history and, and like on the one hand you're like, it feels like we've in a way we've gotten both more civilized and less civilized over time in this weird way. It's like there are things from history where you're like, I can't believe that was ever allowed. But then you look at this where there was just these sort of really uptight rules around war and combat. And you're like, it's like, how are they actually conducting matters like this with so much on the line? But it's, it's funny had strict sort of, strict rules of conduct and what things did and what things didn't. It's very interesting. It's like, above all, we must be gentlemanly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that obviously, it comes with the fact of the, Cornwallis is like a member of the aristocracy. He is Lord Cornwallis, and so naturally he is also thinking of things not just from the immediate manner of winning, the war, but also how he will be remembered for it, because the people who try to, like, a lot of times the leaders of the war, the generals, the officers, the kings, or the presidents on our side, they are in many respects, the people who get remembered, and a lot of times the foot soldiers, who do most of the actual work and the dying do not. And so they try to think of things in kind of a more sweeping way, or at least Cornwallis does, whereas Tavington has a different philosophy. In the kind of that chilling moment when after he orders Wilkins to burn the church, he says the honor is found in the ends, not the means. This will be forgotten. And sadly, I think ultimately his perspective is probably more accurate to what we know would be true, in the fact that atrocities are always committed in war, and we a lot of times don't, history doesn't always reflect on those and with the same degree of thought as just the idea that this side won and this side lost, and the winners, the victors, write the history. But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to fight these battles in a better way, because obviously a character like Tavington, is, presented as a monstrous character, and he is monstrous. And as I mentioned, he is in many respects choosing to be monstrous because he thinks it's his way to advance. Like, I think about that kind of that great scene when Cornwallis is finally recognizing that Benjamin Martin has become too much of a problem, and he needs to unleash Tavington. And Tavington has that line like, "I will assume all responsibility for my actions, free of the chain of command, rendering you blameless. However, if we do this, you and I both know that I can never return to England with honor. What, I wonder, is to become of me?" and Tavington's like, "Okay, well, basically, this is my deal with the devil. So, like, you will do the devil's work, and then I will give you a large land grant." And then Tavington is like, "Tell me about Ohio," which he doesn't get because he dies. But yeah.
Oh God, it's so good. Then the way he chews up the scenery is like nobody else. He's so good. Yeah. Oh God. And since we kind of brought up that scene just now actually might be a good time to go ahead and talk for a minute about Wilkins, played by Adam Baldwin, who, nope, wrong picture. Here we go. Which, I think a lot more people are going to recognize him as the man we call Jane from Firefly, and also from Chuck. He was in Chuck too. But yeah, I almost find it all the more chilling that we don't actually see him again after the burning of the church.
I think we see him briefly at the bat. We see him at the Battle of the Cowpens.
Okay, we do.
We don't see his ultimate fate. We don't know whether or not he lives or dies. But he's the one who's alongside Tavington when Tavington gives the order to charge. But yeah, your larger point stands in that this is Wilkins' big moment of reckoning in the movie. And he's a fascinating character because he represents a side of, again, the movie actually doing a good job of showing like multiple sides on both sides of the conflict. we think about the American Revolution and we think about the colonists who decided to step up and fight for freedom and ultimately won. But there was a large swath of the colonial population at that time that did not want to rebel against England. They wanted to remain loyal to England. They wanted to still be part of England. They still thought of themselves as English. And Wilkins is kind of a stand-in for one of those characters. And that means he goes to some pretty extreme lengths in the sense that he ultimately actually joins up arms against his former neighbors and comrades, and follows, Tavington's orders. But we do see that he is far more conflicted about it, and it comes to a head in the moment that, it is telling that Tavington not just makes the decision to burn the church, but makes Wilkins do it. Because Wilkins had made that bold proclamation earlier in the movie, those who stand against England deserve to die a traitor's death, is basically a way of proving his loyalty to the British. And Tavington was basically like, all right, prove it. And unfortunately, he does. And I do wish the movie gave us more resolution on Wilkins, whether or not he perished or whether or not he survived and had to kind of reckon with the consequences of having, betrayed and murdered his former neighbors. But I recognize perhaps, because he's not the main character, the movie can get away with not doing that. But I do think he gives us that moment where he hesitates,
Yeah, I'm actually fine with where the movie leaves him, and you are right. He does pop up again. I would almost rather like that was his final moment in the film because but it's fine that because obviously he would be part of the battle. But I kind of like that he's left in an unresolved place because I think he's like furthering this sort of, thematic through line of like the horrors committed in war. And though he's in a different sort of position than say Benjamin was in the previous war, he's more sort of following the orders of, horrible, twisted, sick madman. But I think it's a similar thing in that he's going to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life, provided he lived through the battle. Maybe there's a deleted scene where he's shown getting killed at the battle. I don't know. But I actually think it's more powerful if he does survive, because it's someone who should rightfully have to contend with the actions they took, and like the just look on his face says it all, during and after when he throws the torch and lights up the church. It's an absolutely horrific moment, and I think it's a wonderful sort of side story for the film, with this character who goes in a different direction to many of his neighbors, and I think the film shows the gravity of that decision. And why you can't just like it's to take from another epic movie, Kingdom of Heaven, what Baldwin says to Balian, your soul is in your keeping alone. When you stand before God, you cannot say I was ordered by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient at the time. And I think Wilkins is going to have to live with that for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I agree that actually is probably the more thematically powerful note to leave it on. Although maybe I'm just being selfish and thinking like I wanted someone to take him out at the battle. All due respect to the man they called Jane, he'll get to play a more likable character later. But yeah,
Jane isn't exactly
Well, Jane has his own issues.
Yeah, but on the whole, Jane would ultimately like, yeah, well, he does some stuff that's not. He made some not so great decisions, but ultimately he ends in a much better place than than Wilkins. So,
yeah.
Oh man, I love that show. We're going to, I know it's on our list of things to do, a Firefly and then a Serenity stream. We'll get to it.
Yeah, that's at some point. We'll it may not be this year, even though this year is the 20th anniversary of Serenity, but we will find the time to talk about both at some point.
Before we get on to talking to a major contributor to this film, I want to go ahead and do the mid-roll.
Yeah.
And pause for a second. Just want to thank everybody for watching. Even though we haven't had any comments tonight, I have seen that we've got some viewers. So hope you all are doing well. So we got a busy couple of weeks ahead of us, as we have had. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Marvel film, The Thunderbolts, which I'm so excited for. Like, it's, because even after I've watched it a couple of times, I've gone back to watch like scenes from it, quite frequently over the past couple of weeks. And I think it really is one of my favorite movies of the year. It's just like, it's so much, it's so fun. It's so well made. The performances are great. I think it has like, I think it has some of my favorite cinematography out of any Marvel film. I think it's one of the best looking MCU films. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about that next week. And then the week after that, we will be having our discussion on the first 4 episodes of Alien Earth, which we both have gotten to watch the first 2 episodes because they dropped last week, with episode 3 coming up on Tuesday, and I'm loving it so far. I think it's good. Yeah, the world building is like out of this world. Fantastic. And then after that, we'll be discussing the 30th anniversary of Batman Forever, which again I'm really looking forward to. And for both the Alien Earth stream and the Batman Forever discussion, we're going to have our friend AK back on the stream. Back on the channel to talk with us about that. So I know we're going to have a blast, especially with Batman Forever. I can't wait to talk about that. And, I think that's going to be a really fun time of having a lot of laughs, and also just like praising a movie that, for my money, is severely underrated. Yeah. We'll see if we get anybody on the stream who is not willing to put up with my defense of the film. But yeah, and then the week after that, we're also doing a 25th anniversary discussion of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I'm very excited about that. And then we'll be taking a week off and then be back to finish off the last 4 episodes of Alien Earth. And then I'm going to go ahead and, we're going really far ahead, but I'm going to let you guys know that on October 5th, and I did not discuss this with you, Jared, but I didn't think there'd be any complaints. We're going to be talking about James Gunn's Superman.
Brilliant.
So yeah, super excited about that. No pun intended. Sorry. Yeah, I will be waiting. The reason why we're putting it off until then, we had a schedule that we're keeping to, but also I will not be buying it until the 4K comes out, because I've got the Steelbook on order, and I'm not gonna pay twice as much to have the digital release order. Have you already bought it, Jared?
Watched it again, but I mean, because I'm probably not going to get the steel, I will just get the regular, Blu-ray 4K. I can justify buying it twice for this movie. um, I was very pleased that they put it out this early, because I think the reason James Gunn's doing it is because he wants people to have a chance to see it before the new season of Peacemaker drops. But I thought we were gonna, I was hoping that we would at least get the Blu-ray before October so we could talk about it before the end of the year, and lo and behold, we are. So
yeah, I'm less pleased about the the digital release came out about a month after its theatrical release, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But
it's the new reality, at least for this. And I think, Superman has made enough money that I think they can get away with it. But in general, yeah, I wish they would wait a little bit longer.
it made a lot more money. And it's because they've gotten into this cycle now of putting stuff out super early. That's why people expect it now. And if it was the old days, and the home video release wasn't going to be for like 5 to 6 months after the theatrical, then people would be going to the theater more, because they know that they weren't going to have, that they weren't going to have the opportunity to get it at home a month after the fact. And it's like, sorry, I got no sympathy for people who can't wait more than a month these days. We had to wait 6 months for the Lord of the Rings movies. And if I was able to endure that, then sorry. Yeah. I think people nowadays can wait longer than a freaking month, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, we're increasingly short attention span as a society, which unfortunately I don't think that trend is changing, and I think the movie business is changing, and I wish it wasn't, but it's the reality that we live in. And I just, in this case, I am, as I said, I think Superman did well enough that they can probably justify. I am glad that, for instance, it seems like Disney seems to be holding the line a little bit more on those, because the things like Fantastic Four still need to, people still see that in theater.
Yeah. Speaking of Disney, I was like going down memory lane about a month ago, and I was looking at like old like VHS releases. I think Aladdin took like more than a year to make it to home video. Which, like, can you imagine people having to wait over a year for a home video release now?
No, I can't, because it would never happen especially for a movie like that. There's a thing that called piracy that now exists. I don't think they can hold the fort that way.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's I still think that there's a happy medium between a month and a year. So
at least they're not doing what Universal is doing for most of their movies and putting it out on digital after theatrical after 17 days. So
yeah. But I don't think a month is much better than that. I think like I think it should be like the absolute minimum, keeping in mind the realities of what I think 3 months is the minimum.
I mean, that was the old standard. It used to be 90 days, and then the pandemic allowed the studios to cut that in half to 45, and now they're just continuing to make it shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah. Another thing that it allowed them to do was when they put out the digital release, even if it's only like 3 or 4 weeks earlier than the Blu-ray, they can charge like $30 for it. And then when the Blu-ray comes out, then they lower it to the real price. So yeah, I just I'm not a happy camper with a lot of these studio practices for their home video releases. But oh well, what are you gonna do? Okay, and so I'll do my. Oh wait, I already showed it off. I'll show it again. My wonderful Patriot soundtrack, which is great. Everybody, you can get this from Entrada Records. Check them out. But yeah, other than that, you got anything to mention before we jump back into the movie?
No, but I'm wondering if you maybe show that your soundtrack to serve as a segue into the next person you wanted to talk about, a certain legend who has something to do with this movie.
I did. It is like I'm struggling for words because like there's just so many great things to be said. Like this was a really great era for John Williams and his film scores, and he's had a lot of really good eras. But like the late 90s, early 2000s, while he was doing the Star Wars prequel scores, and then like everything in between was just so fucking great. and his score for this film is like one of those really great scores, and I think it's just one of the it's fully an example of like a filmmaker speaking of which, we'll give him more of a shout out, but I do want to shout out Roland Emmerich, the director, who we haven't really mentioned as of yet. An atypical movie for that director, I feel, but he did a great job directing, and we'll give him more props in a little bit, because right now I'm just going to gush about John Williams. But it's an example of a filmmaker knowing the composer he has in his arsenal. When you start off the film, you're going through the credits, and then you have the composer bring in the main theme, and you then place the credit music by John Williams right there. It's like, it's absolutely perfect. And it's just, I think this is maybe one of my favorite main themes that John Williams ever composed, because it exemplifies patriotism for me. When I'm actually on the occasions when I have actually felt proud of my country, maybe they're few and far between at the moment, but they have occurred over my lifetime. I have felt like this was the theme music for those moments, and watching this movie, that theme makes me feel, patriotic and inspired, and a big, moment for me. I think just one of my absolute favorite moments is when Benjamin comes riding up the hill after the troops, near the end of the film, and the theme starts to creep in, and it goes full blast, and his men are cheering him on as he joins their ranks. And it's just one of the most stirring cinematic moments that I can ever remember. It's truly like, you can tell that this was John Williams given an opportunity to like create a score and a theme that like is like pure, American patriotism, and he took advantage of that, and I think composed one of the sort of the iconic scores, of all time. I'm not going to mince words. I think it's that good, and it's one of his best scores. And if like composing the main theme wasn't enough, I think he also created an absolutely beautiful love theme for Gabriel and Anne, and which I love that, which is on the violin, and It's just, it's really, and it's a nice counterpoint. And then also you have the sort of dark theme relating to Benjamin's past and his regrets. And one of my favorite moments of the score is like that theme comes back when, you know, Gabriel is on his knees near the end of the film about to be, you know, what looks to be almost decapitated by Tavington. He's seeing, you know, the soldiers running past him. And then he ends up, you know, killing Tavington and, you know, and having that moment where he says, my sons were better men. And then as he turns around, that theme starts to fade and the colonial main theme comes in. And it's almost like clearing the clouds from the sky, and like he's let go of that darkness now, and it just, and the movie and the score give itself over to the beauty of that main theme. And yeah, I think it's just an absolutely enchanting, beautiful, and amazing score. And I do believe that this was one of the film's nominations at the Oscars for Best Original Score, and deservedly so. It's absolutely amazing.
It was. He didn't win, but that was one of the nominations. One of the three, the others being Caleb Deschanel's cinematography and Kevin O'Connell's sound design, which those are three legends in the business who all worked on this movie. And you can see all of their work to pitch perfect quality in that scene that you mentioned where Benjamin is riding up with Gabriel's repaired flag and just like, you know, silhouetted against like the rising sun. He is, and John Williams' full main theme is in full effect, and you know it is, you know, I'm a little bit tongue in cheek, but it is very much if you're going to indulge in a America, fuck yeah, I get it from that moment. But yeah, the main theme is beautiful. You know, obviously, you know, John Williams has composed a number of iconic main themes, from the Star Wars theme to the Jaws theme to the Jurassic Park theme. Turns out he's a really damn great composer. But I do think that this is very high up in the list of scores, even if, you know, people don't always cite it as such. You know, when I was watching the movie again, you know, both a couple weeks ago and then this weekend, that was one of my overwhelming takeaways was just, fuck, this is such a great John Williams score. And again, you could say that about a lot of movies, but, you know, the man earns it. He, you know, 93 years old, and he was, you know, obviously well established at the point he made this movie, but that, and the main theme is just not the only one. As you mentioned, the music that opens the movie, that kind of haunting, eerie sound that we get over the kind of the cold open with Benjamin's narration of I have long feared that my sins would return to visit me, and the cost is more than I can bear. And that music becoming a refrain anytime we think about Benjamin's past or, you know, the cost of his actions. And then some of the more rousing moments, like, you know, again, the wedding sequence between Gabriel and Anne, and then the moment where as Benjamin is leading the charge up the hill at the Battle of the Cowpens. It's like, I mean, again, this is a case of like, I won't deny that the movie makes me feel things, you know, and among them is not just, you know, the thrill of cinema, but it is also, you know, pride in watching people fight for what would ultimately become my country, you know. So I think that it's an aspirational quality to the music, I think.
Yeah, and there's some really great action music too. I love when Benjamin is charging with the flag, and you got that dun 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 dun. You know, it's It's great. It's and yeah, I know there's all kinds of cynical ways you can say. I'm just going to say, like, the fact that you've actually got the hero of this movie charging towards the camera, using the American flag as a weapon. It's like, I know in like current context, like, there's a lot of ways to negatively take that, but within the context of the movie, I'm like, it's fucking badass.
Yeah. Yeah, I always feel bad. I always feel bad for the horse because the horse did not choose that, and that's a horrible way for the horse to die. But it is it is an incredibly stirring action moment, and yes, it is an ultimately good guys win, bad guys lose moment when Tavington goes flying over his horse's saddle and collapses in an utter heap. You're just like, that's where you belong, guy. That's your level.
Speaking of that confrontation, I want to say, like, I didn't necessarily realize this when I originally saw the film or anytime since. I was just like, oh, this is really fun and badass. But I think because in Braveheart, like, because Mel Gibson is like, or William Wallace is, like, all his fighting scenes are against, like, vast armies, and like, he's never going to have like a one-on-one fight scene with Edward the Longshanks, so there's something really satisfying of, like, once, like, the axe, like, comes out and stuff, and like, they're actually doing, like, not quite hand-to-hand combat, but like, weapon to weapon combat. There's just something really satisfying about all of this boiling down to a one-on-one battle between our main protagonist and the villain. And I don't know that I realized that was the reason why when I was younger, but it's just, sometimes you really just do want to end the fight with a really great one-on-one duel.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just so visceral and so fun. But also, like, I remember holding my breath in, because I'm like, well, of course he's gonna die, It's like, and then it was such a relief when they turned that on its head, and it's like, oh no, the villain is actually the one who's gonna die. And
yeah, no, and builds up to it, obviously because Benjamin Martin and Tavington are kind of circling each other through the entire movie, both after Tavington kills Benjamin's son Thomas, and basically inadvertently creates this ghost, this nightmare, who becomes the bane of the British Army's existence. But we also, just on a pure physical level, as you said, we've seen how incredibly dangerous and capable Benjamin is with his not only his musket, but his tomahawk and his knife, in the incredibly effective but also chilling scene where he rescues Gabriel from the British. When the ghost is born, he kills 20 British people, soldiers, almost by himself, with an assist from his
that's one of the really chilling things about that whole scene is the way in which he just hands the guns over to his son, and he's like, come with me. And like, they're not even talking about the elephant in the room. It's like, we're little kids, you're gonna have us kill people. It's like, it's all very methodical, and he's going through, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what you guys need to do. And remember what I told you boys about shooting: aim small, miss small.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, it's really affecting that whole sequence. But yeah, that's what creates the myth of the ghost.
Yeah. And I do think that, like, and the movie does kind of deal with the fallout of that, with his interactions with his son later, but which we can circle back to. But I do want to say, like, another thing that makes Tavington such an incredibly effective antagonist is not just his cruelty and, just the iciness of Jason's Isaac's stare with those piercing blue eyes. It's the fact that they make it abundantly clear that Tavington is not some cowardly fop who is giving these orders, behind, from a safe place up on the hill. He is down in the thick of it. He is an incredibly capable fighter. He is incredibly dangerous. And that one of the ways the movie kind of emphasizes that is by having him use his sword so often. Like, this is how he actually wants to be fighting. He wants to be up close and personal, actually cutting flesh from bone with this weapon of his. And we have seen him use it to kill multiple characters throughout this movie, including, unfortunately, Gabriel. And so when he finally is wielding it against Benjamin, and Benjamin has his knife and his tomahawk in that climactic scene, it feels like an epic confrontation worthy of, the climax of this movie.
Yeah, God, it's just, it's so good. And, yeah, and you mentioned the fact that he kills Gabriel. Like, that's a really good showdown too. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but I just love the way that whole sequence is like choreographed, and this movie has very deliberate use of slow motion, and sometimes it's just like individual shots that are slowed down to really sort of emphasize like character state of mind, but the sequence when the people from the town come to get revenge for their loved ones, and and just I'm thinking again about the moment where the Reverend tosses the gun to Gabriel. It's such an amazing good use of slow motion, and it's just so gut-wrenching because like you see Gabriel shoot him, but it's like and then it's like the moment with with Oberyn in the mountain. It's like, he's not
exactly,
he's not dead. Don't do that. Like, just shoot him from a couple more times from a distance. Don't give in to revenge in this particular moment. It's like you understand it, but you're like, no, be smart.
No, I mean, it is. I'm very glad you mentioned Oberyn. Well, not glad because it's horrific, but that is exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, 14, 15 years before we all, became acquainted with the concept of Oberyn Martell stunting his victory, perhaps before he actually finished the job. Gabriel, unfortunately, has a similar moment, and it's made all the more, cinematically effective because, again, we've seen incredibly how competent and dangerous Tavington is throughout this sequence. We are watching him cut down colonist after colonist after colonist in brutal fashion, and then he shoots the Reverend, and as the Reverend tosses up the gun, we see Tavington loading his pistol, and we're like, and it's slowed down, but then Gabriel takes aim and gets the shot off, and he beats Tavington. He gets the shot off first. He hits him, and Tavington falls, and you're like, yeah. And then the camera just lingers on Tavington, and the music isn't triumphant. It's like ominous, and you're just like, fuck.
But there is that great shot of like, Gabriel like throwing up the knife and catching it, like, but it's like, it's so tragic because of course this is a moment that is echoing, his father with the tomahawk, and there's just that level of tragedy, like the sort of sins of the father, like coming back to like, would Gabriel have, chosen to try to finish Tavington off like that had he not seen his father, do that or earlier in the film? And it's a question. So it's so, you're just like, no, don't do it from a distance. But
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it is this father, but it also is just the nature of the fact that, you know, Tavington has killed Gabriel's wife and her entire family in this brutal way. And in kind of a different context, I find myself thinking about another Heath Ledger line from The Dark Knight in a very different context, but when he's talking to the police officer and he says, "You know why I use a knife? Guns are too quick. You can't savor all the little emotions." And I kind of think it's the similar function of that. Yes, if Tavington had not just killed Gabriel's wife and her family in this horrific and brutal way, he probably would have just shot him. But instead, he's like, "You took everything from me, and I want you to know that it is me slowly pushing the knife into your heart, and I want to see the light leave your eyes." And that, unfortunately, is what costs him everything, because instead, it's Tavington who gets to see the light leave Gabriel's eyes. And just that is another great moment of silent performance from Jason Isaacs, just the sociopathic look when after he stabbed me, he's kind of like just staring him down and almost tilting his head like, "Oh, so that's how you're going to die." Just like... Somebody kill this man. You almost had him.
Oh God, I hate him.
Not Jason Isaacs. Jason Isaacs is wonderful, but Tavington, oh my God.
Jason Isaacs is delightful. If you ever I don't know how he is in his personal life, but like if you've ever watched him give interviews and stuff, he just seems like a very nice chap. And I mean, again, not necessarily the characters he plays. I was just thinking about how he was so nice in the interviews for the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, and I'm like, oh yeah, but he was playing the Skeksis Emperor in that. He was really awful in that. So he's nice guy, but really good at playing dastardly characters.
Ain't that the way it always seems to go?
Yeah. Also, something that I meant to mention earlier that I wanted to say again, well, not say again, say for the first time, for anybody who watches Outlander, there's a character on that, his name is, he's called Blackjack Randall. And he's a British officer and played by Tobias Menzies. Very much seems inspired by Jason Isaacs' turn in this movie, where he is possibly worse than Tavington. I don't know. It's like once you get to that level of awfulness, it's probably futile to have a competition between characters, but he's really, really bad. So if you're interested in that flavor of villainy, check out Outlander. but yeah, God. So yeah, and so you did mention when we're talking about, Gabriel's, moment of wanting revenge, as someone who like we haven't talked that much about is Anne, played by Lisa Brenner. And I do love the relationship that her and Gabriel have. It's very, this is like what I was talking about earlier. It's the sort of, teen heartthrob, part of the movie where Heath Ledger gets to put those, those strengths of his performance on display. And I just love when she's first introduced, when he goes up to her and she's like, "You know very well who I am, Gabriel Martin. The last time you saw me, I was 11 and you put ink in my tea. Oh, I believe that was one of my younger brothers. No, it was you. And it turned my teeth black for a month." And then he just has this response of like, and then just trails off. So they've got a very nice relationship, and I like the way it develops. I love her dad.
Oh God, her dad is one of the best characters in the movie.
May I have your permission to write to Anne? May I write Anne? Yes, you have his permission to write me. Oh, write her.
Or I've come to call on Anne. Of course you call yourself and not even leaving out perhaps his crowning achievement, when they have Gabriel tied up in the bundling bag, and we get the incredibly sweet scene where Anne gets her revenge and feeds Gabriel the black tea that turns his teeth black, and we get Peter Howard, Mr. Howard, listening at the door through his little horn, and his wife has the great moment. Peter, don't worry, I sew better than my mother did. And you see his eyes go wide. He's like, I hope so.
Oh God! And yet the fact that it all just all of this just is building up to just, the fact that it ends in the horror of the burning of the church, and that we actually get to see not only all the townspeople, but specifically those three, that family just sort of huddled in their horror, and it's just so really haunting, and just it's so awful on such a massive scale. That again, we're dealing with a character like Tavington, who is just the absolute worst, excuse for a human being, ever. But we do get lots of beautiful moments. I am particularly love the moment between Benjamin and Anne when he gives her the, which again is just it's the payoff is going to be horrific, but it's a wonderful moment right then, and that in of itself is tying to earlier in the movie when with Benjamin's daughters, and the older one telling the younger one about the North Star, and to look for their mother there, and it's just so it's really beautiful. But ultimately this movie is gonna destroy us by having Benjamin find that in the rubble.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's the thing that they kind of had been, drawing parallels between Benjamin and his relationship with his late wife, and Gabriel and his burgeoning relationship with Anne, because ultimately it seems like Benjamin was kind of lost a bit when his wife tragically passed away. She was kind of his guiding light, and we see that in many respects, Anne is not just, Gabriel isn't just interested in her because she's pretty, although she is every bit, as she has in that great scene with the church, at church, yes. She is actually every bit as much of an ardent patriot as Gabriel is. And when Gabriel comes to recruit the men to the local militia, she is the one who stands up and gives the speech, basically all of you were talking about independence, just a few days ago with such fervor, but now the time has actually come to commit. None of you are willing to do this. Half the men in this church, including you, Father, and you, Reverend, are as ardent patriots as I. Will you now, when you are needed most, stop at only words? Is that the sort of men you are? I ask only that you act upon the beliefs of which you have so strongly spoken, and in which you so strongly believe. And that is another great hell yes moment when she gets all the men to start standing up in the and join Gabriel's cause.
And this is really the first full-on rendition of the colonial theme by John Williams in the movie, and it's just, oh God, it's so good. And it's so funny. I was looking at Because I always thought that, she says the guy's name, Dan Scott. I thought she always said, "Damn Scott."
Again, this is a case where you hear the movie dialogue for years one way, and then you watch it with the subtitles one day, and you're like, "Oh, that's what they actually said."
But yeah, works either way. But yeah, no, that's an incredibly strong moment for her, and just again, it's this sort of, I think it's one of the strong moments of the movie early on when, actually, like, and this is why, like, Benjamin and Villeneuve are off, like, gathering men that they know can, like, do the dirty work of warfare. Gabriel and Anne are getting people to, fight for the cause, for this belief in a better nation. So there's these two different sides, and ultimately they're going to need both. And it's not like, I say, like, Gabriel and Anne are, doing the more idealistic duty of, enlisting people like that. But then, of course, as we see with Dan Scott, he's not necessarily a good person at this point in the story. He's got a ways to go. And he has things to learn from people, who are perhaps a bit more sort of realistic in their concept of what warfare is. I really like the moment when Villeneuve, says, your sense of patriotism is as pale as your skin. Mm-hmm. And which, by the way, I'm just going to say it because, like, I know it's running through both of our minds. It's really, really funny referencing a character whose name is Villeneuve, because I just keep thinking of Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, I had to do it. I had to do a double take there for a moment, but yeah. It tracks, and I'm sure we'll talk more about him because that actually reminds me when you mentioned of Benjamin going and recruiting with Villeneuve, of what I think may be my favorite joke in the entire movie, which is when they show up at the tavern.
Are you sure this is the right place to recruit to militia? And just pause, and then God save King George.
And then dead silence, and then everyone pulls out guns and knives and rotten fruit, and they're just like, they pause, and then you just like, they look at each other, and then they run behind the door, throwing stuff at him. I think we came to the right place.
Yeah. Which then leads us to all these wonderful characters lining up to fight, and then we get John Billings' son, going, "I might kill me some redcoats." I believe you would. How old are you, son? Not old enough. But his time will come, which it won't. Like that. That's the thing. Like, it's really planting the seed here of the later scene when John Billings, returns home and sees his wife and son, murdered by the British. But yeah, we don't know that yet. So.
No.
So it's a nice humorous moment here, but yeah, and then this is also the scene where we get introduce Occam, and still not super great the fact that he gets enlisted against his, well, Benjamin does the the least he can do, which is telling him to to make his own mark, and so the movie doesn't really. I don't know. I guess the notion is if he's not joining up with them, he would just go back, to, his, 'cause, 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 'cause the man who owns him, and but then we get the revelation that after a certain amount of service he'll be a freed man, which is good. Yeah, that's kind of a whole sketchy thing, because this we know this feeds into the conversation he has with Gabriel about building a new world in which all men are free, which that's not really going to happen with this war. And even today, with we're still struggling in certain respects with the all men equal under God thing. But yeah, it's but I think it's nice to have some representation there of that part of not only with his character, but also with what's her name, with
Abigail, is it you're talking
Abigail?
About?
Yeah. Who basically is essentially in many respects a mother to Benjamin's children. And yeah, it's and of course she's the important distinction there is that none of the people on the Martin estate are slaves. That's made clear, which of course doesn't matter at all to Tavington. He takes them all prisoner. But it's really nice to see that they have been freed later on in the movie, and taken to the refuge out by the where is it that they're where they have everything set up. I forget what it's called, but it's like by the it's a beach area.
Yeah, it's basically a community of freedmen who they find refuge with, and they find Abigail there. Yeah, I mean this is an element of the movie that I will acknowledge it probably does not deal with perfectly, especially given the time in which it was made 25 years ago. And if someone wants to level fair criticism of the movie for not, perhaps reckoning quite as much in depth with the issue of slavery in this movie, I think that is fair. I will just note that, like as you said, one of the things that the movie kind of sidesteps a little bit is the fact that many of these American colonists who were fighting for freedom against the oppression of the British Empire were in fact slave owners themselves. Some of the characters who were, particularly here in the South, this movie takes place in South Carolina, and on plantations, and the fact is that, like, well, the character of Benjamin Martin, they rightly kind of make it clear that he is not a slave owner. He has only freedmen working his plantation of their own free will. A lot of the characters that Benjamin Martin is based on, characters like people like Francis Marion, were slave owners. And I think that that's a case of the movie recognizing that we can't really have our protagonist be a slave owner and have him be sympathetic to modern audiences. So
yeah, I was going to say that, like, yeah, it's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because like we're just not going to cheer on a slave owner. That's just not, even 25 years ago, that would have seemed unconscionable. And so, but then if you don't but then if you have your main character who is a Southerner who lives on a plantation, doesn't, own slaves, it also runs the risk of feeling disingenuous as well. But actually, I think that's why it's a good thing that we are presented with the character of Occam, who is a slave, and 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 we are shown his owner, who seems a disgusting person, and Benjamin is very much like shown to be like, I don't care what he says, it's important to me that you're the one who who makes your mark, and says you're willing to join up with us, and so I think it does about as much as it can with the notion that, and I'm going to say it probably could do more. I'll leave that up to other people to, it's probably not for me to say exactly how they should have portrayed that, but like the main factors here are that we couldn't have our main character be a slave owner. That's just wasn't going to work. And B, this is also like there's an entire other war also that is about that, and we've had, and you remarked on like the number of American Revolutionary War movies that have been made. There's actually, I think, been far more Civil War films that have been made, and so that's I think it's a bit easier to sort of contend with that in those movies, and perhaps it's the better place, but it's not for me to say, and yeah, so I mean I think it's good that they include it, like it's there, it's just perhaps it's inevitably just not dealt with as well as it otherwise could be, if for instance you had more representation not only in front of the camera but behind the camera as well. Maybe they could have, but again, I'm not sure they necessarily felt like this was the place to tell that story in a more embellished form, because this is very specifically about these characters, and I don't know. It's like any way I try to word this, I feel like I'm stepping on my own feet, or on my tongue, whatever. Yeah, it's as you've said, this movie is probably not the best vehicle to sort of contend with some of the, which is honestly why there should be a lot more movies about the American Revolutionary War, because we should get like a lot of films that deal with far more like different aspects of the war. But so it's imperfect as it is, but I still think that this movie does a good job of like portraying like what the idealism for what is being aimed at, but also I think it contends sort of, even if it's just in the subtext with, yeah, that all sounds nice, but it doesn't really come to pass until it's not even really contended with until another war, where that specifically is the issue on the table.
Yeah, and that I think is I think it's implied that we understand that, having understanding the general course of American history, and this is a case of where I recognize that the movie has it's a long movie, it's almost 3 hours, but it has a specific story it needs to tell, and there are certain things that you can't deal with, especially an issue as complicated in this one, without completely changing the focus of the movie. So it needs to be acknowledged, but perhaps it's not going to be as fully unpacked as it would in a different movie told by a different person with a different background and a different perspective. And as you said, this is where a case of, I think, we need more movies and more diverse storytelling both in front of the camera and behind the camera, so that one individual movie does not need to bear the weight of every movie about that, or everything about that time period, and I think that the reason that the movie ultimately, I don't want to say gets away with it, but in the sense like it does have something that reckons with it, is the character of Occam, who is played, I want to acknowledge, is played by the actor J. Arlen Jones, who actually, unfortunately, sadly passed away within the past couple of years. And this is probably what he's best known for. But I mean, the reason that the movie, is able to, tell this story is because he gives such a great, ultimately very stoic, but very dignified performance. And you can tell that there's real depth and emotion and complicated feelings that he's struggling with fighting this war. Because ultimately he is, forced to join it. But then by the end, when he has served out his 12 months and is a freed man, he makes the choice to come back. And as he says to Dan Scott when they're standing next to each other in the battle lines, I'm here now on my own accord. And Scott, who is now kind of gone through his reformation after Occam saved his life, says he's honored to stand with him. And again, that is perhaps for some people a little bit too clean a resolution, but I think that it is, like, the movie is showing its intentions there, and I think its intentions are good.
Yeah, I mean, they're not the main characters. Like, so no matter how you slice it, that's going to feel like the sort of resolution of, like, their back and forth is inevitably going to feel a bit underdeveloped. But I think it's, as you say, I think the movie is sort of signaling its intentions there, even if we don't even if we're not necessarily spending as much time as perhaps we would like if this was a television miniseries.
Yeah.
Like, we would have gotten much more of their relationship in depth and the sort of transformation of their dynamic. And but in a 2.5 to 3 hour movie, there's just not the opportunity to focus on that and this is a movie with a lot of characters, to be honest. And you've got to stay focused on our main characters, on our primary main characters. So yeah, I'm glad that it's there. Could have, there's certainly ways it could have been perhaps done a bit better, but it is what it is. And I think you're right. I think perhaps this movie shouldn't be saddled with sort of having to carry the weight of, like, being everything to, to all audiences of, like, American Revolutionary War, sort of people looking for that. And I feel bad because I'm sure there have been other films about the American Revolutionary War, that I'm just not super familiar with. And we're probably really showing our age right now because I'm sure there have been other ones, but I think for our generation, like, this is the movie in the way that Kingdom of Heaven is the Crusades epic, so yeah, the solution to this is they should be making more historical epics. But yeah, and so something else that sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, I don't know where you were planning to go, but you had just mentioned there were a lot of characters in this movie, and one character that we really have not talked about much is Charlotte. I don't know if you want to do that now or if you had somewhere else you wanted to go.
No, let's go and do that. Yeah, I love the fact that this. I often forget that this is Jolie Richardson. I'm thinking most especially right now of her turn in The Sandman.
Yeah.
Recently in season 1, where she plays somebody far more like duplicitous and and dangerous. In this, she's very nice, and it's clear that her and Benjamin are totally into each other
Oh,
from the first moment. And it's like, but what's holding both of them back in that regard is, Benjamin's wife, who was, her sister. It's like not a thing you just jump into. But yeah, no, I liked her performance. I will like, and this is not her fault at all, but I will just say, like, this is the one, like, I'm fine with it, but it is a bit of a groaner of a line. It's a free country, or at least it will be.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm like, kind of like the moment with Andy, the whole like the get away from here, you bitch line by William Ramos. I'm like, you get one. You get one. You get one that's completely on the nose. And but their dynamic is, as you say, very sweet, and from the moment they lay eyes on you, can tell, are like, oh, these two are so besotted with one another.
And I love that when they finally give it to him, and then the next morning when they give each other the kiss goodbye, like, the kids' reaction isn't one of surprise.
Yeah,
they're just really excited.
Yeah, it's like they're like, finally, because I mean, and like, because I think this scene may only be in the extended cut, but like when one of her moments early in the movie when they go to stay with Charlotte, and Gabriel is talking, or Benjamin's talking about his kids, and Charlotte says they have long needed a woman in their lives, Susan most of all, and you can tell she's looking like right at him as he says. You can tell she's like, me, it's me, I'm right. But yeah, I mean, and as you like, I mean, she is, she's the love interest for Benjamin. She is, she's not fighting on the front line. She doesn't have, perhaps quite as much to do even as someone like Anne. But I do think it's a very, warm and necessary performance in this movie, because it again is showing that Benjamin has the possibility of actually moving forward with his life, rather than dwelling on the past. And I do think after the it's a free country, or soon it will be line, there is the great moment where they're sitting together at Gabriel's wedding, and she just finally decides, okay, I'm going to do something about this. And she looks at her, she's like, I'm not my sister, and he's like, I know that, and she's like, well then. and he's like, well, what? And she's like, oh my god, how dumb. But then he's like, okay, I get the hint, and then they kiss. So,
oh god, and that's like, yeah, that's why, like, and there's a reason why, like, for everything else, that you can say about him, and there's a lot, like, there is a reason why Mel Gibson was a huge movie star, and it's because he could bounce back and forth between the drama and then these completely just hilarious reactions. His well, what is just like so hilarious. Oh god, but yeah, no, that whole dynamic is great, and no, what I wanted to talk about was the sort of, and I think we started to talk about this a little bit, sort of the sort of visual identity of this film, and the cinematography, which I think I was thinking especially about when we get like our first major big like battle sequence, when Gabriel has gone off again and Benjamin follows him, and they're watching the battle through the window in the house, and it's the first time we really see like Cornwallis, at a battle, and just, I'm thinking about that sort of imagery of the soldiers walking past the camera with the flags, and and just seeing the wide open battlefield, and then stuff like the cannonball hurtling at the camera. And I think that what's kind of lost about this movie is I do think that, like, the battle scenes in particular have their own sort of visual identity that's quite unique from other epics. And it was perhaps like one of the first, sort of epic movies, or war movies, I should say, because Gladiator came out the same year and was doing some, it had its own number of like big visual effect shots, but and not to say that other movies didn't, but like with Braveheart, I think they just like assembled like mass troops, and all the extras for that movie, and just shot it in a way to make it look like they had more than they did. But with this movie in particular, they were really utilizing visual effects to create like these mass armies, and I just think it makes it have a very a very unique look to it, and it's a very colorful film as well, and you really see it on display in those battle scenes with like the green fields of grass and everything. So yeah, I think in a way that kind of goes underappreciated about this movie is the distinct look of a lot of stuff like the battle sequences.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was watching a behind the scenes featurette on the 4K about called The Art of War, about like the making of these battle sequences and how much, they really wanted to do everything as much as they could practically. They had, hundreds of extras all in these, immaculate costumes, and they were, they had stunt people doing, charging at each other with bayonets and muskets, and all this stuff is being captured on camera. But then they also were at the kind of the beginning edge of the visual effects revolution. They were seeing what they could push, and one of the things that they did was deciding to focus on the cannons, and how Jason Isaacs has a great moment in that behind the scenes featurette. He's like, I always thought, like, for whatever reason, I always just thought about the cannons being like bombs that were going off. It's like, no, they're actually giant metal balls that are being hurled out of these cannons, and they're gonna bounce, and when they hit people, they're gonna do real damage. And this movie has moments involving cannonballs that I remember to my perhaps new to R-rated movies eyes, where I was like, oh my god. One of which is the moment where the guy gets his head blown off by it. And the other is
that still shocked the hell out of me today. I knew it was coming. I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah, and they talk about like how they did that with the stunt coordinator and then integrated it with the visual effects. And then there's the moment in the later battle where the cannonball bounces and tears the dude's leg off, and that actually might be worse.
Yeah, it's like, I don't normally think of this as being like one of the, the sort of hyper violent, war epics, but it's pretty damn violent.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think to the point where it kind of catches me off guard, because because the focus on it is so much around like family and these sort of more sort of wholesome ideas of like the patriotism of like waving the American flag and families being brought together or separated, and so I don't think of it as much in this sort of visceral way of like Gladiator and the sort of mad rage of Braveheart, but watching it today, I was like, god damn, they're like, from like just, and the scene where Benjamin is going into a rage after Thomas is killed, and and hacking at the soldier and drenching himself in blood, and the way that his sons look on at him horrified. It's like, this is a movie with a lot of violence and a lot of blood. Like, it does not shrink away from any of that.
No, I mean it earns its R rating, and there are even in the theatrical cut, not the unrated cut that I had watched a couple weeks ago. Like there are still moments like in that sequence when Benjamin is taking down like 20 British soldiers almost by himself, and it's being shot in this very effective way where we're seeing him like dart behind cameras and being like and seeming almost like a ghost in the shadows. But then when he finally emerges and is using his tomahawk and moving almost Mel Gibson moving almost faster than the camera can track and cutting down soldier after soldier and finishing it off in that moment where the second to last, I should say, British soldier is holding Gabriel's knife to Gabriel's neck, and Benjamin kind of just pauses, and then he throws his tomahawk, gets it past Gabriel, and buries it in the forehead of this British soldier.
Which, by the way, there's a moment just a couple seconds before that when, like, with all the gunfire, there's like this a column of smoke in front of him, and then he flips out the tomahawk, and it's just this really cool, like, badass, like action hero moment.
Yeah, and it sets up the great reveal later when the one guy who survives, the kind of the Scottish soldier who gets interrogated by Tavington, and it's basically like he's like, how many were there? He's like, I couldn't really see how many, maybe one. And you're just like one, and to be fair, it's like that's discounting the contributions of Benjamin's sons Nathan and Samuel. They shot a lot of British officers, but yes, it was mostly one man.
Oh, God. Yeah, I will say that is like one thing that I did like in the extended cut version is that it actually shows that soldier like lying there, and the way he kind of sees, and that's the shot that is still in the movie is when Benjamin kind of fades away in the camera shot, and so but when you see it's from that soldier's point of view, it's like that adds more to him saying it's like a ghost. It's yeah, and God, it's that sequence is great, and and then obviously we've talked a lot about like the final battle sequence, but and you mentioned a couple times about Benjamin like running forward and holding the flag, and that is just such a like great moment. And when you see like all the other characters like looking at him, and Chris Cooper's character then going, hold the line, move forward, and which by the way, like I just want to like take a couple minutes also to talk about Colonel Harry Burwell, played by Chris Cooper. Like the only thing I'd seen Chris Cooper in prior to this was American Beauty, and very different character, not like the character who I did not care for in that film. And so it was like in this, it was a completely different context of him being, an American like officer in the Revolutionary War. I was like, oh wow. And but like he was just so good in this movie, as he was in American Beauty, but this was like, he just evokes like this guy who is going to rally troops, and is really good at giving these speeches which is why it's so funny when he's like, I'm not an orator, and it's like then proceeds to give a really good speech. It's like that's what they always say. But and then he has great moments like when Benjamin then does show up and he's like, Benjamin Martin, I'm in no mood for a lecture.
Or the when he's asked after they were in the General Gates' flood, who's in command here? I am, I think. Chris Cooper is always good in everything, but I love this performance because he is the kind of essentially just a quintessentially like good military man, good soldier, it seems that he actually has a decent heart as well. And, and he and Benjamin have history together and a real respect for one another. There's that moment in the early, scene where Benjamin is actually speaking out against, war because he doesn't want, to put his family in danger. And Benjamin and Burwell has a couple of great moments. One, he sticks up for Benjamin when someone tries to shout him down. He's like, Benjamin Martin, I fought alongside him. There is not a man here or anywhere to whom I would more willingly trust my life. But then he also calls out, like, when Benjamin's basically like, I have 7 children, who will look after them if they go to war? And Burwell looks at him and is like, wars are not fought only by childless men. And we get that nice callback. We're not like, it sets up the moment later where we learn that actually Burwell is expecting his first child. He's not a parent yet, but he will be, and he is by the end of the movie. And the fact that he names his son Gabriel is, just a nice, way to cement the bond between those two.
There's also a really great moment which brings back the opening line of the film, where after Gabriel has been killed, and he goes to talk to Benjamin and, like, both to comfort him but also say, please stay with us, Benjamin, and nothing can return your sons, Benjamin, but you can justify their sacrifice. And that moment when Benjamin says, why do men believe they can justify death? Is it arrogance? And then he says, what Benjamin's wife always said, which is stay the course. And Benjamin goes, my course is run through. And, which then will lead us to Benjamin seeing the flag that Gabriel fixed, and then lead to that great moment of him, riding up the hill with the flag. But I think that's a beautiful scene, and it's just showing the sort of the depths of his despair in those moments. And it does take, his friend talking about honoring their sacrifice, that's not going to do it. It is like his son, speaking to him in a way from beyond the grave, and showing how much he believed in this, and which will lead him to staying the course and continuing to fight. So, yeah.
Really good. I see Danny has joined us in the chat. The chat's been kind of
hi, Danny.
Yeah. But yeah, I haven't seen this movie, Breach, but
there's any number of great Chris Cooper performances. He's just an absolute legend. I remember a couple of years ago when Greta Gerwig's version of Little Women came out. He was in that too, and he was so good in that. It's like anytime I see him, I'm like, oh God, he's just going to blow me away with another great performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and again, that's one of the great things about this movie is just filled with such amazing performances. And I want to bring up Villeneuve one more time, because there's a couple moments I didn't highlight, one of them being when all the militiamen start to show back up, and Benjamin sees Villeneuve, and he goes, trust the French. And he goes, goddamn right, trust the French. Where else do I get the chance to kill to kill some redcoats? And he goes, perhaps a couple of wounded when you're not looking. Which, I don't know, it's a dark edge to it, but it's also funny.
It does. Yeah. The actor, his name, I can never pronounce his name, Tcheky Karyo. But yeah, he's so good.
And then when the And then when the French show up on the ships at the end of the movie, and Benjamin says, "Vive la France," and he says, "Vive la liberty."
Yeah.
And they have a beautiful resolution to their, French. I almost feel like Benjamin is on the verge of being like, "Hey, buddy, are you sure you want to go back to France? You want to be my neighbor?" Because I feel like they've had a real bonding experience throughout the movie. But
they have, and they have a nice hug at the end.
Yeah.
No, I mean it is ultimately like, that the scene at Yorktown is it's not like a full-on battle sequence because we've had our big battle with the cowpens earlier, but it is again one of those kind of cinematically thrilling and narratively thrilling moments when we see he's talking about like Washington escaped and cut Cornwallis off at Yorktown. It's like, and Cornwallis could not retreat to the sea. It was blocked off by our long lost friends who had finally arrived. And they don't say it's the French, but we know it's the French, and we see that it's them shelling, and then we cut to Cornwallis in his little bunker, and he's just reckoning with the how did it come to this, an army of rabble, everything has changed, everything will change. And then in a true to history thing, he is too ashamed to come out and surrender himself, so he sends his subordinates to do it.
Oh God, yeah. I just, now that we mentioned him again, I just want to spend one more minute just talking about how much I enjoyed Tom Wilkinson in this movie, because he has sadly passed away not too long ago, and he was one of my absolute favorite actors. And I love his entire scene with Mel Gibson, halfway through the movie, like everything with the dogs, and the fact that he's trying to get the dogs. Mel Gibson and Benjamin has to urge them on, and then he whistles for them and the look of fury in his eyes. But yeah, no, I just, he's such a naturally charismatic actor, and he did a really great job at playing both villains and really good like men. If anybody has not seen the great Tony Gilroy film Michael Clayton, which I have to be honest, I really underestimated that movie when it first came out. I thought it was well made, but I kind of scoffed at it a bit because I viewed it as more of a sort of Oscar baity movie, at the time than maybe it deserved. But I think the years have borne out that it's an incredibly well-made thriller with some great performances, and Tom Wilkinson gives like an excellent performance as like a moral compass in that film. And so if anybody hasn't seen that, I highly recommend it. But yeah, I just that man is so good. And this was like one of the first things that it wasn't the first thing I saw him in. I think he played the bad guy in Rush Hour. In the first Rush Hour. I remember seeing him in that. Which, playing another British villain. But yeah, you're talking about like reactions and line deliveries from him. I love when, his second in command brings in, one of the straw men. He's like, "One of our captured officers, my lord," and he just staring, and then it cuts away, and he goes, "My reputation suffers because of your incompetence. That man insults me."
my favorite Tom Wilkinson in this movie is when he gets to play indignant, not only with those scenes you mentioned, and my favorite, at the moment I mentioned earlier, that Tavington, damn him, damn that man, but also a moment of almost pure comedy, the moment with his formal dinner jacket. It's a horse blanket. I don't know, my lord. I think it looks quite nice. Very well, it's a nice horse blanket.
Oh God! But the capper of that scene, oh, fireworks! Oh.
When the ship blows up, and you just see like the thousand-eye stare of Cornwallis, and you see Tavington like roll his eyes back into his skull, like down the drink, and it is like a comedy of absurdity that like they're having these lavish balls while all this is going on, but that's the British aristocracy for you.
Yeah.
Why am I attending balls in South Carolina when I should be attending balls in North Carolina?
Oh God. Yeah. So like, hats off to him. It's just it really rather broke my heart when his passing happened. It's just I think I always have this fantasy that, like, because of course anybody who knows me knows that it's my dream to make films. I'll get on the therapist chair later to talk about the state of things with regards to that, but I think I always have these these fantasies in my head that I'm going to get to work with some of my favorite actors, and so in addition to just being saddened by someone's passing just because of all they've gifted us with, it's also a little bit of a death of a dream that I'll never get to, at the very least, meet that person, but also, direct them in a movie or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of my favorites, and I'm glad for all that he did gift us with. So. Yeah. But yeah, are there any other major points that you wanted to discuss that we didn't get to?
There is one. I want to talk about the moment that always makes me tear up, if not full on cry, every single time I watch the movie.
Yeah.
Which is Susan. Little Susan, Benjamin's youngest daughter, who is, it's introduced. We see her early on. She's the one who gives him the little when he is trying to make the chair earlier in the movie. But it's revealed that she's basically been silent since the death of her mother, and it's a great reveal when we finally see her talk later in the movie with Gabriel, and but then she reveals that she's upset at her father for going away, and she's like, I hate him. I hope he never comes back. And when Gabriel has to lie to Benjamin about what it is that what it is that she said, it's a twist of the knife. And then when they reunite and she runs away, and you can just see how heartbreaking it is for him. And then when he tries to get her to say goodbye to him and she won't do it, and you can see he's devastated, but he turns away, and then she goes after him and then just can't contain anymore. And the Papa, please don't go. I'll say anything. And I'm just like, oh. It's it gets me every single time. I don't know how you can have a heart in it if it not gets you.
I know the movie's manipulating me, but I don't care. I don't. It's so oh my God. And then I'll come back, and it's and you're and I'm I remember watching it for the first time, based on past experience, I don't find that likely. but sure enough, he does.
Yeah, and it's a great moment that when he sends the letter to Charlotte at the end of the film, and he tells them that tell all my children, but especially Susan, that I will keep my promise and I will be coming home. And we see her little smile there. So sweet.
God.
That actress, the actress who plays Susan, Sky McCole Bartusek. Again, child actors can be a different, a hit or miss sometimes in these movies. She was absolutely great. And even though he is probably the character who gets among Benjamin's children who gets the least shine, his youngest son William. I do want to shout out then the classic, like, oh, that's that actor. The fact that that's Logan Lerman, who has gone on to be in like many other really good movies, like Perks of Being a Wallflower. You're just like, oh shit, that is him. That's him as a baby.
Yeah, I don't know that I realized that that's who it was until I watched the movie today and I saw his name in the credits. I'm like, wait, what? Because obviously I have seen him in many things, from Perks of Being Wallflower to Noah to a number of other things. And yeah, he's shown himself to be a really gifted actor. So it's funny seeing him. He has a line earlier, which I don't know how I feel about in a modern context, but it really got a huge laugh in the theater. And I don't know, I still find it kind of funny when he's like, when, they see that the red coats are out in the distance and the armies are fighting, and then they're inside having dinner. He's like, we'll have to fight them off. Well, probably kill us men and do Lord knows what to you women. And Abigail goes, Nathan.
Yeah, I think that's Trevor Morgan, and he's but yeah, he's like all of Benjamin's kids. Mika Borum as Meg, Gregory Smith as Thomas, who obviously gets a lot more to do because he's kind of a linchpin for the movie on his death. And then I think it's who's the last one. I'll find it. Brian Chapin as Samuel. But yeah, especially. So that's just an amusing thing. It's kind of like the moment I always think about with that type of casting is like when I saw Pride and Prejudice and loved it, but I didn't really block Carey Mulligan, and then I went back and saw Carey Mulligan in a bunch of other things, and I went back to the movie, you're like, oh my god, Carey Mulligan is in this movie. But yeah, I really wanted to shout out that moment with Susan, because it is the movie. It is like I fall for it every single day.
Oh yeah, like I was like, I was tearing up like before that moment, just because, just memories of of just losing it at that moment. Yeah, God. But no, now you got me thinking. I'm going to digress for a minute and just be like, not only like, you mentioned like Carey Mulligan, but just, the fact that
Jenna Malone.
Jenna Malone, Tallulah Riley. It's just like so many, and it's funny, in the case of Jenna Malone, she had played the young version of Jodie Foster in the movie Contact.
Yeah.
And so that's where I remember when I saw Pride and Prejudice, I was like, who is that? I know I recognize her from somewhere. And turned out it was that. And then later on, then she was like in the Hunger Games and, all this other stuff. So, but yeah, Carey Mulligan and Tallulah Riley in particular, those are examples of like people who, when I saw Pride and Prejudice, I wasn't yet acquainted with them, but they went on to bigger things in years after. It's always wild going back to movies and you're like, wow, this really had an all-star cast.
Yeah. And I think the reason I always focus on Carey Mulligan is because that was her film debut in Pride and Prejudice, which is just wild.
Oh God, yeah. When we get to our anniversary discussion of that, it's gonna be a lot of fun talking about the two of them bouncing off each other because uh, they're clearly having the time of their lives in that movie, as is everybody. But yeah. So I mean, I think that about wraps it up for our discussion here. What I promise we'd sort of come back to him. We didn't really do that, but I do want to like give a lot of credit to Roland Emmerich, the director of the film, who, you know, is most famously known for Independence Day. You know, not exactly, probably not a name you would think of for a, you know, an epic about the American Revolutionary War. And there's been speculation that over the years that maybe he may have had a helping hand from Mel Gibson in certain respects for given his experience in making Braveheart. But at the end of the day, I mean, the buck stops with, you know, the actual director of the film. So I have to say, I think he did a remarkable job. It's not an easy thing doing a big epic like this.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to pull it off, and we've seen plenty of examples of filmmakers who were just not the right fit for that kind of movie and seeing it kind of falter. Even if you're a great director, say by the one fella's name might be Oliver Stone. And, you know, and you have problems like just sort of pulling off, you know, and making everything coalesce, you know, in the right way. And I think that this is one of the more successful historical epics of that era, you know, alongside movies like Braveheart and Gladiator. So, yeah, I just think he did a remarkable job, and yeah, he's probably more, like I said, he's more known probably for his sort of big, like, you know, the big, you know, disaster movies and stuff like that. But, and I'm not going to say which I prefer. I'm obviously a huge fan of Independence Day. I love that movie with every fiber of my being. But in many respects, like this is sort of the genre that I love more. So I don't know, that I'd be hard pressed to pick one over the other. But bottom line, I think he did a great job making this kind of movie where a lot of more experienced directors have failed. And I think that deserves all the acclaim in the world. And he did a great job, like getting like fantastic performances out of the cast and just visually pulling everything together and making it a really rollicking, fun ride that like really cleverly balances like drama, action, humor, you know, all this stuff. So yeah, I think he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as much as I do love Independence Day, I will say that this is my favorite Roland Emmerich movie by far. But he has made a lot of other ones I enjoy. Like I'm a big fan actually of The Day After Tomorrow. I think that's a classic example of a disaster flick that, you know, Roland Emmerich kind of got put into the box, you know, of like that's the type of movie that he makes, and this is a step outside that box. And as you said, he has had some up and downs in his filmography. I think people will hold him to account for his like 1998 Godzilla that people think is probably not the greatest. But I would say that this shows that he really is a talented filmmaker, particularly with on this scale. I want to give him his due credit, along with the entire cast and the name we have not mentioned yet. The screenwriter, Robert Rodat, who he was very passionate about this project. He's one of the people who got it off the ground. And if you haven't heard of him before, he also wrote a little movie called Saving Private Ryan. So he knows
Oh,
how
wow.
to he knows how to craft a bit.
He had a good couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I won't say that it's like a perfect movie by the like in any regard, but like in like it's not a perfect screenplay, but I think it has a lot of really great elements to it. I think most of the dialogue is really good. I think again the way it all comes together, and you know, you got to balance a lot of different tones, and you know, and you got to give like characters like great speech moments, and you know, yeah, it's like I said, I won't say that it doesn't have flaws in it, but I think a movie like this can ride or die on the writing, and I think for the most part, the writing does a really good job. Especially just like and this also has to do with like the actors themselves, but also I think there's great chemistry amongst the different characters, and like sort of back and forth banter and things like that, and you know, writing is not all dialogue, but it's a big important part of it, and I think this movie definitely soars in that regard. So okay, so I think that'll wrap it up for our discussion on the Patriot. Again, I love this movie. It was such a great joy to revisit it today, and yeah, I will just like, actually there was one more thing I wanted to say. I wish I could just show the whole thing on here without like getting like a copyright infringement, but and maybe I should have like done this early on in the stream when talking about sort of seeing it for the first time, but this movie has one of my favorite movie trailers of all time, and there's in particular a piece of music, I'm trying to remember who it's composed by. I'm drawing a blank, but it's like this great big like choral / electronic piece of music that just like screamed epic, and it was used in a lot of trailers at the time. Craig Armstrong, he composed it. I don't remember what the movie was for, but it's like the movie has like a full like 2-minute epic trailer, and you could just end it right there, but then it gives like this extended like montage to that music of, you know, just, and it's got great taglines like, you know, before they were heroes, they were family, you know, and things like that. And it's just like, it's a ridiculously long trailer, probably like a good 3 minutes long. Maybe not so, like it seemed ridiculously long for the time. Maybe not so these days. But it was just like, I remember it just made me feel like, oh my God, I absolutely have to see this. This looks like it's going to be amazing. And so yeah, I've got the trailer linked in the description. So like if you're someone who likes good movie trailers and you've never seen it before, give it a watch, because it's well made, and like that's where my love of editing started off, was like making movie trailers when I was in high school. You know, and so yeah, I always got a kick out of seeing like really good well-made movie trailers. So but okay, yeah, that's enough from me. Just gonna remind everybody that next week we're going to be talking about Thunderbolts, and then after that we're doing
Alien Earth after that.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to Alien Earth, the first 4 episodes, then Batman Forever, then Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Then we'll be off for a week, and we'll come back for the final 4 episodes of Alien Earth, and then we'll be talking about Superman the week after that. So yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up, and yeah, that's it for me. Anything from you, Jared?
No, I'm thank you to everyone who watched it either now or in the future. I hope that this is a movie that, as we said, given the times, some people may have more complicated feelings about it. But I just ultimately want to reiterate that it's one of the things that I love about this movie is that it is a reminder that the ideals of America are things that are still worth striving for. And that battle is not, that's not over yet. It may never be over, but if we are to believe that that is, a cause that is worth fighting for, then we have to see instances where it is, where the people who believed in those ideas actually, made it happen. And I believe there are people like that out there in our country today who are doing so. And that is what it means to, continue to seek that moniker that we often cite, the idea of a more perfect union. And we will hopefully one day be able to say that promise was achieved.
Yeah, that's the hope. Anyway, I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful night, and thank you everybody who tuned in, and thank you, Jared, for I always have a pleasure talking with you, and this was a lot of fun tonight, and looking forward to next week. Is next week the first time you and I will have gotten to talk about an MCU film together?
No, because we talked about Deadpool and Wolverine.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely right. But also, that was sort of
that was kind of, I know it's an MCU film, but it was also kind of a Fox X-Men film,
Yeah. So yeah, but still, it's going to be a lot of, and it won't be the last one because I'm going to want to talk about Fantastic Four when that comes out on video. So, yeah, as I hold up, represent love for the more derided, chapter of the MCU, being the hipster that I am. But anyway, so we'll have fun talking about that next week. And until then, hope you all have an absolutely wonderful night. And I don't have a catchphrase for this week. So good night. See you guys later.
Take care.